Tonight we've got Michael Schratt. That's classified, Air Force Secrets Revealed. This is his first appearance at MUFON LA, coming to us from Chicago to present a fully illustrated program that specifically focuses on U.S. AF classified aircraft and special access programs. He'll have the insider info on such cutting-edge projects as the Lockheed M151, the real F-19, the Fluxliner, and the Boeing Phantom Works Bird of Prey. Michael Schratt is a private pilot and a military aerospace historian. He currently works as an aerospace draftsman near Chicago. Michael has lectured across the country on the unique subject of mystery aircraft and classified propulsion systems buried deep within the military-industrial complex. He was a recent guest speaker at the Oshkosh AirVenture 2006 event, which was the world's largest air show. Michael's many contacts include former USAF pilots, retired Navy personnel, and aerospace engineers that have maintained their top secret Q magic clearance. They've revealed to him their firsthand experience on classified black programs. MUFON LA, please join me in a warm welcome from Michael Schratt.
Well, Jolene, I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join all of you today. And what I'd like to do for you this evening is give you a brief overview of some of the classified aircraft programs buried deep within the military-industrial complex. And we're really going to break it down into three distinct levels today. We're first going to consider black programs. That's any program that has less than 5% congressional oversight. Second program is a deep black program, and the third and final category is what's termed a USAP, or Unacknowledged Special Access Program. Now, if you work in one of these projects and the President asks you for specific details regarding that program, your mandatory reply is to be, Mr. President, no such project exists. So that's kind of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So it's appropriate that we begin here with one of our first aircraft. This is Boeing Phantom Works Bird of Prey, declassified October 2002 under the current Bush administration. 38 test flights were made between 1992 and 1999. This was the first aircraft to use a single composite tooling, also 3D virtual reality design. You'll notice here that it has the same smooth contouring that the B-2 inhibits too. And $67 million were spent on this program, approximately 47 feet in length, 23-foot wingspan. And you can see here the twin canted vertical stabilizers that are canted on the downward position to reduce the radar cross-section range. And then this is the forward section here, and we'll get into some of the things that the B-2 does as it electrically charges the leading edge of the wing. And this is the air intake here, single pilot design. And here you can see this is a rendition of the Bird of Prey in flight. This aircraft currently resides under, or actually hanging above, Tacit Blue, which is in the Air Force Museum, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. So if you wanted to see this aircraft, that's where you would go. Now you'll notice here there's absolutely no seams to this aircraft whatsoever to reduce the radar cross-section, and that's because of the single composite construction that's being used. Aft section here with the exhaust port. And then here you can see just a few seams for the control surfaces, and then just for the access doors for the retractable landing gear. And a good shot of the pilot. So this is Boeing Phantom Works Bird of Prey. Now we move on to Aviation Week Space Technology, talking about Polecat. This is a low radar cross-section flying wing demonstrator that has recently crashed, so this no longer exists. But this was a secret project that was being procured up at Palmdale Air Force Plant 42, not too far from here. Detroit Free Press talked about a secret ledger hides military projects. Pentagon black budget has tripled under the Reagan administration. So what's going on, and where are these black budget funds going to? Well, if we break this down here, we see the growth of the secret defense research and development in billions of dollars by fiscal year. So here in 1981, it was just over $500 million. By 1988, it rose to $9.122 billion. Then we move over here, federal spending by category in billions of dollars. We have education was at $25 billion. And then we have transportation at $28 billion. And then, according to this report, $35 billion was spent on Pentagon black budget programs. So I asked the question, are we spending our money correctly here, or is something else going on here? We're spending more for classified programs than we are for our schooling, for our education. The priorities here are really being messed up here. Air Force black budget, fiscal year 1988, total was $51.1 billion. Of that was $19.1 billion. That was the U.S. Air Force black budget program. That's for the fiscal year 1988. So that's just you a small cross-section of what's actually happening. Now, if you doubt me on this, I would definitely suggest that everyone obtain a copy of this document right here. This is the Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation R1. This is the document that's handed out to Congress every January for their budget. And if you look through this rather boring document, it's about 24 pages in length, you'll start running through a number of these code names here, such as Sikh Bandit, Sikh Cliff, Senior Citizen, Senior Jade, and they also talk about how many millions of dollars were spent on procurement for F-16 operations, electronic countermeasures. But then these code names start dropping off the radar screen. Not only do they not tell you what the code name is or what it's referring to, but they don't tell you how much was spent. So we have no idea how much was spent or what these code names actually are. So the point being that you take the total amount from the knowns, and what you're left with are the unknowns, and that represents the black budget programs. Here you see the different code names over here. Have flag. We also have forest green. You'll notice there's absolutely nothing there. So the proof is right here. Here's where all the money is going. Now, A12 Avenger II was a joint McDonnell-Douglas General Dynamics program used as a high-altitude attack all-weather aircraft designed to replace the A6 Intruder. In 1990, fiscal year 1990, there was a procurement of 650 of these aircraft, but by 1991, Dick Cheney canceled the program at the cost of $5 billion. A twin-engine aircraft, two-seat, very low radar cross-section. So the question is, where did all this money go to? $5 billion? We have nothing to show for it. We have absolutely nothing to show for the $5 billion. All we have is now a dilapidated, derelict, full-scale mock-up of this aircraft. The government would have been better off writing each one of us a refund check for the amount that was wasted on this program. Very good example of wasteful abuse in government spending. Here you can see the twin air intakes on the A12 Avenger II. So now we can see the A12 Avenger in flight. You can see here that the pilot and co-pilot would be in the tandem configuration, and then virtually no seams here for a very low radar cross-section, even lower than the F117. Now this is the actual 2D drawing sketch from Lockheed Senior Peg. This was the design that was the competitor to the Northrop ATB Advanced Technology Bomber by Northrop. Of course, they won the program, but Lockheed's version was an overgrown F117 that had a very interesting tail boom arrangement right here and a forward swept V-tail arrangement. 400,000-pound gross weight, very low radar cross-section, and you'll see here, instead of using the smooth contouring on the B-2 that we see today, Lockheed's ATB used the faceted flat plate technology that's used on the F-117. We can move on to the next one. Here's the actual 1/5 scale wind tunnel test model of Senior Peg. You can see the tail boom in this location here with the inverted forward swept V-tail. Next slide, please. Type strategic long-range bomber, 152-foot wingspan, high subsonic speed. You certainly wouldn't want to go supersonic because the sonic boom footprint would give away your position. So Lockheed Senior Peg. Next one, please. I just love the leopard skin instrument panel and the solid gold bomb sight, talking about the B-1 bomber that was originally designed as the B-1A under the Carter administration back in 1977, resurrected later as the B-1B under the Reagan administration. So here we see this fantastic, allegedly fantastic bomber, but our daycare center is dilapidated and falling apart. So again, it's a misappropriation of funds once again. Next slide, please. Northrop Tacit Blue was the first aircraft to use a quad-redundant fly-by-wire flight control system with a side-scanning radar. It's currently at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, so you can see it there. It's currently sitting below Tacit Blue, or Boeing Phantom Works Bird of Prey. So that was the Tacit Blue. Next slide. Here you can see the twin canted vertical stabilizers, the air exhaust in this location here. Only one of these was actually made and has now been fully declassified. Next slide, please. The only known photograph of the interior of Tacit Blue. You can see some of the antiquated analog gauges and some of the sheet metal panels here, but this is the only known photograph that has ever been released of the interior of Tacit Blue. Next slide, please. This is a good art piece that was done in France. I just thought that was interesting because it used some of the same contouring as the B-2 stealth bomber. Next slide, please. Now, some of the original configurations on the B-2 was a flying wing configuration without the sawtooth trailing edge that we later saw, but they did have the correct configuration for the placement of the engines. 4 engines embedded, 2 on either side of the center line of the aircraft. Some of the original design configurations in 1987 before it was rolled out on November 22nd, 1988. Next slide, please. Now, this is a Revell model of a scale model of the B-2. There is some information to indicate that Northrop built 2 subscale flying prototypes of the B-2 before the actual one was rolled out, so that's certainly to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Interesting report on the Honda Stealth Bomber, approximately 90 feet in length. It's a sheet metal mock-up that was made for the Honda CRX SI release. And what happened on this is immediately after this commercial aired on the television, the phones at the Pentagon blew up completely because they had almost definitely nailed the configuration of the B-2. Now, their wing sweep angle is a bit too steep, and you'll notice here that the chord of the wing is a bit too thick. But generally speaking, without getting any inside information, they were able to build this mock-up and have it very closely resemble the actual B-2. Next slide, please. Now, here we have the actual B-2. Northrop is the prime contractor, 172 feet in length. Now, the question I ask is, we know that the current cost of the B-2 is $2.3 billion per aircraft. That's more than its own weight in gold. Are we getting our money's worth out of this thing, or is there something going on with the B-2? Is there more going on than meets the eye? Next slide, and I definitely think there is. Here you can see the interesting swept wing configuration here with the sawtooth trailing edge, and that will become important as we move along. Next slide, please. Washington Post talking about Project Senior CJ, that was the code name for the B-2 stealth bomber. Unraveling stealth black world, questions of cost mission arise amid debate over secrecy. And that's definitely the issue that we're concerned about this evening. Next slide, please. The only known illustration that we will be showing a cutaway here, but some of the ordnance, conventional nuclear armaments that the B-2 can carry. Next slide, please. And this is the only known illustration that we have showing the interior cross-section of the B-2. You will never see, I've never seen one, maybe somebody has, but I have never seen a declassified photograph of the Northrop B-2 stealth bomber with the engine access panels removed, showing the interior placement of the engines. Doesn't exist. You won't find it. You can contact the former Norton Air Force Base photo archives, where a lot of this was based, but it's not there. They won't release it. Next slide, please. This is a friend overseas who made that for me. But we do not have a photograph, period. Nobody does with the engine. It's still classified. B-2's changing shape. Now, in 1983, Northrop changed the wing design on the B-2 stealth bomber at the cost of taxpayers of $1 billion from the original single sawtooth trailing edge that you see here to the double W or sawtooth trailing edge that you see here. Now that cost all of us $1 billion. The original U.S. Air Force design request for proposal was a high-altitude bombing platform, but then later on, the U.S. Air Force changed their mind. They decided they wanted a low-altitude bombing platform that could hide from SAM sites. Next slide, please. Here you see here, original ATB platform, the single sawtooth trailing edge, and then after 83, $1 billion later, they had the double W or sawtooth trailing edge, and that will definitely become important. Next slide, please. The changing shape of the B-2, again, the single sawtooth trailing edge. Next slide, please. Black World Secrets, talking about what's happening here. A whole series of Northrop engineers were disgusted when they found out how some of these programs were being run inside Pico Rivera, where this is being assembled, and they thought that a lot of these technologies could be trickled down to the commercial airline industry, but it will never happen because that technology is classified. This is the Aviation Week Space Technology, June 1992 issue, so if you want to check it out, that's right there. Next slide, please. They specifically stated in this article, for the reference works, that the B-2 electrically charges the leading edge of the wing to reduce the radar cross-section, and then electrically charges the exhaust gases to reduce the infrared signature. Now, something interesting happens when you do that. When you electrically charge the leading edge of the wing, they found out via a 1968 report from Northrop that there is a drag coefficient reduction up to 60%. Now that is fascinating because this kind of technology could be retrofitted to the airline industry and you could reduce your fuel consumption by up to 60%. What would that be worth to the airlines? Billions of dollars. Think about that. They spend millions of dollars just to get 1 to 2% more fuel economy on the airlines. United Airlines, American Airlines, they would jump at something like this, but it'll never happen. This is the Townsend Brown patent that talks about how this actually happens, and also the flame jet generator. Next slide, please. Now, another interesting thing that happens is when you electrically charge the leading edge of the wing and you negatively charge the ions in the back, you set up what's called a gravity wave, where there's a gravity well in front of the aircraft and a gravity hill in back of the aircraft, essentially pushing it across the sky, and you could actually turn the engines off and this thing turns into an over Unity device with almost an unlimited range, supersonic, and no acoustic footprint. So that's obviously one reason why it's classified. Next slide, please. Here are some of the different variants of some of the ATB stealth bomber competitors. Avro Corporation had a very interesting design, which is British Aerospace, and then the early B-2 concept here. Next slide, please. Here's the actual patent, 4,989,006, that talks about how the B-2 electrically charges the leading edge of the wing. Next, please. And then this is how you take a conventional aircraft like an F-15, an F-14, an F-16, and you make it stealthy by surrounding the whole aircraft with an ionized plasma. Same patent number there. Next slide, please. Now, let's break this down cost-wise, and we'll see if we can find an anomaly here. Okay, $35 million to develop stealth technology, so let's give them that. To purchase the Pico Rivera plant, that's $65 million. To build the first model of the Tacit Blue, which we showed before, that's $1 billion. 100,000 salary for 4,000 people, that's $400 million. To purchase computers, that's $2 billion. To purchase equipment, that's $2 billion. So the grand total is $5.5 billion. And you subtract that from the $22.4 billion that was spent on the program, what you're left with is the unaccounted for money. We don't know where the rest of the money went. It completely disappeared. So I'm proposing that the remaining money went into a deep black program version of the B-2 that we're going to get into. Next slide, please. Now that might be this aircraft here. This is the aircraft that was seen by over 25,000 eyewitnesses in the Hudson Valley area between 1982 and 1988. They all reported, and this is a dead solid case, people pulled off to the side of the road, hundreds of people pulled off to the side of the road and saw this thing flying about 172 feet across, completely silent, completely black. It did have lights on the bottom of it, but hundreds of thousands of people saw this thing. And what they reported was a flying wing boomerang-shaped craft with a single sawtooth trailing edge at the back. This is identical to how the original Northrop B-2 stealth bomber was proposed. So it's certainly a high possibility that this is what actually was seen. Next slide, please. Now, again, if you doubt me, you can check out this book by Thomas Vallone talking about electrogravitic systems. Specifically goes into the details of how this actually happens. Next slide, please. This is an interesting report from Leslie Kulba. She talked about here, an underlying theme is that T.T. Brown propulsion, once developed, will usher in an age of flight so revolutionary it will make all previous aviation from the Wright brothers to space shuttles constitute the Stone Age of flight. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Talking about electrogravitic propulsion systems, more advanced than anything you'll see at your local air show. Next slide, please. Here we have the DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, talking about the quiet supersonic platform, an experiment to decide how we can lower our acoustic sonic boom signature for military applications by elongating the nose of the aircraft and having a very supercritical blended fuselage to wing root configuration. Next slide, please. Interesting report from Popular Science talking about electrochromic panels and how we now have daytime stealth. Most, if not all, the F-117 operations during Desert Storm were flown during night. Well, everybody, we definitely have the daytime stealth technology. This particular article spoke about how they take what is in back of the aircraft, they electrically charge the panels on the other side, and they can make what's in back of the aircraft reflect on the top surface, so essentially making it invisible and blend into the background. Now this can be retrofitted to troop transport, helicopters, battle pieces, AAA, SAM sites, even for soldiers. So this is already in the field as we speak now. Next slide, please. Sneaky Pete was a 1984 prototype. It was a knockoff from the Long Easy designed by Burt Rutan. Task was the designers for this. Test pilots were Dick Rutan and Mike Melville. No photograph of this aircraft exists. It looks very much like the Long Easy. And then this directly led into the General Dynamics Model 100. Next slide, please. Lockheed Skunkworks Classified Aircraft Project Q. Two of these aircraft were built by Lockheed. They were subscale prototypes that actually did fly. However, unfortunately, both of these crashed during the test flight program. Next slide, please. A 1973 report from Lockheed with Ben Rich as the Lockheed CEO or the senior project design engineer on this program was a direct competitor to the Grumman F-14 Tomcat, which was a carrier-based aircraft. Here you can see almost the same nacelles that the SR-71 uses, also with the single vertical stabilizer rather than the twin-canted vertical stabilizers that we see on the SR-71. Next slide, please. CL 1980 takeoff weight was 26,665, and here you can see just this shot of the single vertical stabilizer. Next, please. General arrangement here. Now this would not have been the most stealthy aircraft at that time, but this is just prior to when stealth started coming online in 1977 during the Carter administration. Next slide, please. Now this is a really rare three-view drawing of Convair, which is General Dynamics Project FISH, which stands for First Invisible Super Hustler. This aircraft was designed to be airdropped from a B-58. Maximum speed was Mach 4 using two ramjet engines, 90,000 feet. Now you'll see here the pilot sits on the port side about 15 degrees offset from the center line. This is for the look down on approach to landing, because when you have a highly swept delta wing configuration that you see here, it says here 67-degree highly swept delta wing, your approach angle is very steep and your landing speed is very high, so you'd have to be a really good pilot to fly this. Next slide, please. Here you can see the provisions for the two ramjet engines, and then what was interesting here is they also had two GE J85s that could be popped out during the very last sequence of the landing for possible slow configuration. Next slide, please. You'll see here again the two ramjet engines and then the air intakes at the lower aft section. Now this was the direct competitor to the Kelly Johnson designed Lockheed Skunkworks A12, which became the SR-71. They would have won the contract, but Kelly's did not require another aircraft, so that was one reason why the SR-71 won the contract. Next slide, please. Here you can see it being loaded onto the second portion of the B-58, and then right here the pilot's getting on here. This was actually never built, but it was a very interesting design from Convair. So let's move on. Now we have the Boeing X-35 that lost out to the JSF by Lockheed. Another political reason why Lockheed won, the same reason why they won with the F-22. Next slide, please. The Lintemco Vought ATOM-2, that stands for Air Deflection and Modulation. Now this is specifically dealing with the Coanda effect, where they're directing the thrust of the engine downward, and this causes a lift coefficient. We'll go on to the next slide. And you can see exactly how they're doing this here by using the bleed exhaust from the thrust of the engine, which allows this thing to have vertical takeoff capability. Next, please. Here you can see the air intakes here, and then this is the section here that has flaps that go down at about 35 degrees, and we'll certainly talk about a more advanced version of this as we move on. Next, please. Boeing secret report declassified. This is from the Bernard Lindenbaum collection at the Wright State University near Dayton Air Force, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we can move on to the next slide. You'll see in this report they have a number of wind tunnel test models, all with a 75-degree swept wing configuration. Inside here, this is the probe here, and then there were two ramjet engines for high-speed flight in this location. Highly swept delta wing model. Next slide, please. Again, you can see the lineage, the historical lineage, the same blended wing, 75-degree swept wing configuration. Next, please. Now, this is Boeing's Softocrad. This is interesting because this is the only 3-view drawing that has ever been released. It's never been put on the internet. But what's interesting about this, now this is a VTOL stealthy troop transport, and over here you can see they're loading a Humvee in this location here, so it also has a troop transport capability. But over here, just as an afterthought, it says range and wind tunnel tested. So in this particular case, it's more than just a paper airplane, because at the very least they tested one of these, or they actually built a subscale flying prototype. Next slide, please. Here you can see the troop transport here. This is the VTOL section here, and then there's about 24 to 30 troops that could be procured inside the belly of this particular aircraft. Next, please. Interesting report from Lockheed, a vintage 1960s proposal for an entire infantry fleet transport system. And if we move on to the next one, this is an in-ground effect vehicle. We have helicopters, we have infantry vehicles, we have tanks, we have an entire Army regiment that was going to be moved with this, but of course it never happened. But certainly an interesting proposal from Lockheed. Next, great. 1975 report from McDonnell Douglas talking about LTA, or lighter than air vehicles. Some of these are over 800 feet in diameter. Some of these have about a 600 feet across section, have been seen being passed by joggers in the Antelope Valley, Lancaster, Palmdale area. A stealthy blimp transport type system. Next one, please. Here you can see one of their cargo loaders. So if you go down the 405, or you're on the 14 in Lancaster and it's late at night and you see this 500-foot diameter craft, just know that there's a possibility it's one of ours, according to the 1976 report from McDonnell Douglas. Next slide, please. The minimum development rotor airship, again, the same type configuration, over 800 feet across. So the concept that the airship is obsolete is completely false. Next slide, please. Now, a number of these aircraft have been spotted in Belgium, have been spotted in southern Illinois, all over the world. There's no question about it that these things absolutely do exist. Next slide, please. Lighter than air vehicles, are they on the rise? Absolutely, absolutely on the rise. Well over 800 feet across, and you would not see this because it uses radar absorbent material in conjunction with the Kevlar skin, so you wouldn't even see it on radar. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of the aircraft that may have been seen by the people in the Hudson Valley area. This is what they saw, the boomerang-shaped craft with the single sawtooth triangle that we see here. Next slide, please. Now, I question the official government response that what people were seeing in the Hudson Valley was a couple of ultralight guys flying in formation. I mean, are you kidding me? Rotax 447 engine is a 2-cycle engine. It's extremely loud. You can hear it from 3 to 5 miles away. So the concept that it was just a couple of ultralight pilots flying at night in formation with lights is ludicrous. It's a joke. Next slide here. You can see here's the Rotax 447 engine, 2-cycle engine. It's extremely loud. You could hear this from miles away. There is no question that this is not the explanation to the Hudson Valley sightings whatsoever. Next, please. Here is an interesting lenticular re-entry vehicle, 1960s report from North American Aviation. This is their nuclear atomic bomber program. Next, please. Now, the F108 Rapier was designed to be a complementary aircraft to the XB-70, and one of the XB-70s crashed in Barstow, California, but this aircraft was designed to be its complementary aircraft. It was actually never built by North American Aviation, but certainly an interesting design proposal. Next, please. The Switchblade from Northrop was used in the movie Stealth. This is the actual patent number, 5,984,231. So at the very least, we know that Northrop did have a design proposal for something that would be a possible Mach 3 all-weather fighter attack interceptor with a low-speed capability and then high speed when you have them in the swept-forward configuration. Next, please. Popular Mechanics, top secret, reshaping the look of Americans' air power. So we're talking about an aircraft that flew in conjunction with the F-117s during Desert Storm, something that was used as a real-time digital reconnaissance intelligence gathering aircraft. Next, please. This actually does exist. It really does. They have not declassified it. It was based at Tonopah Test Range. I had a single pilot here, twin-canted vertical stabilizers. There was one air intake on both sides of the pilot's compartment, control surfaces along the trailing edge of the aircraft. Now, how do we know that this exists? Well, one case in point is a gentleman who I know who spoke to his good friend who is based as a KC-135 boom operator, and during Desert Storm he was told point blank that we are having 2 aircraft come up and a 3rd aircraft. Now, 2 of them were F-117s, so 2 F-117s came up and they took on fuel, they broke away. The other aircraft was one of these. He said it was a flattened type shaped craft with the 2 canted vertical stabilizers. He could definitely make out the air intakes on both sides of the pilot's compartment. So obviously what he saw was a very close resemblance of what you see here. So there were approximately 1 of these TR3As for every 3 F-117. So approximately 18 of these aircraft were built. Next slide, please. It was also carrier based, so it could be launched from a carrier. A very good illustration done by my good friend Mark McCandlish, who I think is the world's foremost conceptual aerospace artist in the world. Next, please. Now, here's the actual patent number for the General Dynamics, McDonnell Douglas. Also, Teledyne Ryan was, they were retained as a subcontractor for this program. So we know that there was something that flew along this line. Next slide, please. Air Force's Monthly, talking about the 1994 crash of a top secret aircraft at Raf Boscombe Down. Very little is known about this particular case. We can move on to the next slide, and you'll see that all we know is that on takeoff roll, somehow the pilots ran into some problem. There was a nose gear collapse, we think. The pilots may have been injured. The craft was damaged on the nose, and it was towed back to the hangar. You can see the hangar here. It was completely blackout, and we could see that there was a tarp that partially covered the middle portion of the aircraft. It did not cover the nose of the aircraft or the tail, but only the mid portion here. And we know that it also had twin-canted vertical stabilizers that were canted on the inward position. It was eventually loaded onto a C-5, which flew back to Air Force Plant 42, Palmdale, which is right up the road here. And that's all we know about this. We don't know anything else about this particular case other than it did exist. Next case. This is the illustration put together that indicates what it might look like. It was a cross between a YF-23 and something that has a very interesting 75-degree swept wing configuration. Next, please. Secret project, America's $1 billion high-flying 4,400-mile-an-hour ramjet. Now, at the close of the SR-71 program in the late 80s, there was talk about something that was going to replace it, or that we have satellites now that can do the job. We no longer need the SR-71. Was there a replacement? Next slide, please. I believe absolutely that there was something called the M151 TAV, or Trans-Atmospheric Vehicle, sighted definitely over the Lancaster area. Two witnesses that I spoke to who saw this thing fly directly over their head said this thing was massive, about 270 feet across. You can see here there was a forward chine section that was very similar to the SR-71. It had retractable canards for low and high speed configuration. The chine section terminated in a delta wing configuration with the winglets on the exterior of the wings themselves. So that's the basic outline of this aircraft. Next, please. Now, this was seen in Burbank. The forward section fuselage of this aircraft was loaded during a nighttime departure of a C-5 in Burbank. And what witnesses reported was the forward section of a SR-71, but more blended than the SR-71. Here you can see the cross-section here, a much more blended round-type configuration. Next, please. Now here is a C-5 being, or SR-71 being loaded into a C-5, just to give you an idea of what it looked like. Next, please. Again, here's the C-5 with the section popped up, and this is actually the A12 going inside. Next, please. Notice the forward chine of the SR-71 is a lot sharper than what you see in that Aviation Week Space Technology article. Next, please. This is, yeah, that's fine. And then here you can see just below here a much sharper chine section. Next, please. Now, if you took the current A12 configuration and you took the engine inlets and you turned them into boxes and you put them under the craft, and then you move these vertical stabilizers and then pop them out onto the wingtips, what you would have essentially is the M151. So you can see that Lockheed definitely has the historical lineage on this aircraft. Next, please. Again, here, just take these vertical stabilizers and pop them over here, and it's not all that different from what they've done before. And the first flight of this aircraft was in 1962. So there's a group that meets every other October in Nevada called Roadrunners Internationality, and at the end of their meeting, they all hold up their glasses and say, "And we're still the fastest. You know, we're still the fastest." Are you kidding me? It's 1962, and this is supposedly still the fastest? Obviously, we have something quicker now. Next slide, please. Here you can see the twin canted vertical stabilizers and the titanium configuration of the SR-71. Next, please. Now, this was given a gentleman's nod by Ben Rich, who took over the reins of the Lockheed Skunk Works in 1975. The section up here was basically designed by John Andrews, who was the senior project design engineer of Testers Model Corporation in Rockford. He lived in San Diego. This was his configuration of what he thought the Parasitic aircraft looked like. So that's not the most accurate thing. Very well done. But we do know that what you see here is very, very accurate. Very, very accurate. It conforms to the Aviation Week Space Technology article that we saw earlier. The two canard sections here that can be retracted for high-speed flight. There was a pilot, co-pilot, and launch control officer who was in direct communication with the crew of this Parasitic aircraft. And this is the aircraft that used the two combined cycle turbo ramjet engines. The smaller Parasitic aircraft used scramjet engines, that stands for supersonic combustion ramjet. It also had a small liquid rocket that was built by Rocketdyne to move a small payload into a low Earth orbit. Next slide, please. You can see here just what it actually looked like. This is the release of it here. Next, please. And you can see the Parasitic aircraft here, a good shot of the canards and the popped out configuration, and then the long nose section here. You can see the main landing gear here with the nose gear. Next, please. Now this is a good shot of the Parasitic aircraft on the top section. Now Boeing's TAV was launched from the belly of the aircraft. Next, please. Here you see Mark's drawing with the box type sections for the air intakes. Now, eyewitnesses who have seen this and who have worked on it said that these air intakes were so large that you could drive a Volkswagen right into these things. So they're very, very large. Next, please. Good illustration of what this aircraft looked like. Approximately 279 feet in length. The Parasitic aircraft, having a crew of at least 2, was about 100 feet in length. Next, please. Now, the Copper Coast TAV, this was definitely a Lockheed Skunkworks design, trans-atmospheric vehicle using JP-8 jet fuel. You can see here the section where the pylon is for any type of parasitic aircraft that they would fly, and we definitely have the historical lineage of this because the D-21 drone flew many years before this design was ever on the drawing board. Next, please. Copper Coast TAV, this is version number 2. Spoke to the senior project design engineer who worked on this program, and basically he told me that one of the design parameters, actually 2 of the design parameters, was number 1, it had to be launched from a 0 launch length type situation using a solid rocket booster here, so this would have no takeoff roll. And then on approach to landing, after most of the fuel is burned off, it had provisions for 2 strap-on jet pods so that it could do a missed approach. So we're talking about, LA to Tokyo in about 3 hours. That was the whole concept behind Copper Coast. And then this is the payload base for 30,000-pound payload. Lockheed Copper Coast. Next, please. Here is the TAV being launched from the pit with the retractable hydraulic arms, and this is how they would actually launch this. The same exact launch procedure that was used for the F-100. Next, please. Now, this is talking about Lockheed Project ICE, a no-tail type configuration. There's no verticals on this for a very low radar cross-section. Next, please. Here you can see the actual wind tunnel test model. These things cost thousands of dollars alone just to machine the wind tunnel test model. So they're not going to spend all that money for nothing. So at the very least, something might be flying that looks like this wind tunnel test model. Next, please. Now, it's very interesting that we consider some of the comments by Ben Rich, who was the former Lockheed Skunkworks engineer who took over after Kelly Johnson. And he made a number of very interesting statements. We stand at the threshold of an opportunity to create an exciting new airplane. An opportunity to use the technology honed over several decades to develop an aircraft for commercial use that can fly at speeds of Mach 6 and possible higher. It makes sense, it is feasible, and clearly there is a need for it. So here we have Ben already laying out that there is a need and we do have the technology for such an aircraft. Next, please. Aviation Week Space Technology wrote a very good article by Bill Scott, which specifically highlighted the 2-part dual stage to orbit parasitic aircraft, Boeing's TAV, or what they're termed the Black Star. Next, please. You can see here, this is their actual patent number on it being launched from the belly of the ship, similar in size to Lockheed's version. Next, please. Now, this is the actual patch pilots that are used by the C-5 pilots who fly these aircraft and who are loading these. And this is the actual designation that they use on their flight suits. Next, please. And this is also the shoulder patch worn by Lockheed Flight Crew's modified C-5 Galaxy. And I'll let the audience decide what this insignia stands for at the bottom here. Next, please. Here you can see the good cross-section of not only the parasitic aircraft, but the mothership TAV by Boeing. This is their version. It's very similar, almost in appearance, to the Lockheed configuration. So Aviation Week Space Technology article. Next, please. Same slide here with the aircraft being launched from the belly of the ship. Next, please. 200 feet in length, 120-foot wingspan, and then here you can see the XO, or orbiting vehicle, being launched here, and the same type configuration with the retractable canards, almost identical to Lockheed's configuration. Next, please. Boeing's TAV being launched from the belly of the ship. Next, please. Now, this is talking about Chris Gibson's sighting, which was in 1989. He's the one who saw these on an offshore oil drilling platform, which started the whole fanfare about Aurora. He saw KC-135 and also 2 F111s, and then being refueled was a completely black 75-degree swept wing triangle configuration. And this was his actual pilot report. And from then on, we started getting reports all around the world about a black 75-degree swept wing triangle configuration. So definitely his was a credible report. That was the first reported. Next, please. This is a photograph of him here. This is a classified aircraft that was seen in a hangar in England. Might have been at Raf Boscombe Down, but at least one of these was built also. Next, please. Now, the 1983 National Security Medal with Ronald Reagan and Kelly Johnson. And here we see him receiving the award. And he was the president of the Skunkworks all the way up until 1975 when Ben Rich took over. Next, please. And here is Ben. I never met Ben. Maybe possibly some of you did. I considered him to be a very nice gentleman. He was a very, had a sense of humor. I feel that he was somewhat on our side because he dropped a number of hints that talked about classified aircraft. He never released any classified information, but he did drop a number of important hints that I want to go through here. Next, please. Significant statements made by Ben Rich regarding classified aircraft and propulsion systems. Now, we won't have time to go through each one of these, but certainly some of these are important. We did the F-104, the C-130, the U-2, the SR-71, F-117, and many other programs that I can't talk about. We are still working very hard. I just can't tell you what we are doing. Another one here, and these are absolutely 100% verified. These are actual statements by Ben. The Air Force has just given us a contract to take ET home. We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in deep black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to humanity. Coming directly from Ben Rich. Next, please. There is an error in the equations, and we have figured it out. And now we know how to travel to the stars, and it won't take a lifetime to do it. And then here it says, during a speech on March 1993, it's time to end all secrecy on this, as it no longer poses a national security threat, and make the technology available in the private sector. This is exactly what the Northrop engineers were proposing. Next, please. Now, we also have the report from Ben Rich talking about an interesting conversation that was done with Jim Goodall just prior to Ben's passing. He asked if Ben would be interested in doing a non-holds-barred interview. It never happened, but he did get a phone call into Ben at the hospital, and he told Jim Goodall, quote here, "Jim, we have things out in the desert that are 50 years beyond what you could possibly comprehend. If you've seen it on Star Wars or Star Trek, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort." Ben Rich talking about things flying that are 50 years beyond what we could possibly even dream of. So, pretty amazing. Next, please. We have some things. We are not stagnating. What we are doing is updating ourselves without advertising. There are some things and new programs, and there are certain things, some of them 20 to 30 years old, that are still breakthroughs and appropriate to keep quiet about. Other people don't have them yet. So again, here we have Ben Rich talking about programs that are 30 years beyond what we currently know now. Next, please. Now here's the first known illustration of the F-117 stealth aircraft. Nobody knew what it looked like. You know, from 1977 all the way up to 1988, this program was in operation for over a decade. Nobody knew what the actual F-117 looked like. Next, please. It was declassified for the first time with the photograph on November the 10th, 1988. Originally, it was designed to look like this F-19 configuration. This is very similar to Tester's model. When it was finally declassified, it looked nothing like this whatsoever. Next, please. Now, the question is, if we have a gap between the F-18, which is the Hornet, and the F-20 Tiger Shark, which was a Northrop, there's a gap of the F-19. Was there an F-19, or was the F-19 the F-117? The confusion was very serious back in the late 1980s when this thing was declassified. It turns out that there actually was an F-19. Next slide, please. And here you can see the F-117 here, and then the faceted plate technology that they used. Now, when this aircraft rolled off the assembly line, it was already obsolete, definitely, because this was the first generation of stealth. When you see the B-2, which was rolled out November 22nd, 1988, They completely done away with the faceted flat plate technology, now going on to the smooth contouring that you see in the B-2. Next slide. This is the historical lineage of the design that led to the F-117. The most perfect stealth configuration is a saucer design. Next to that, it's a diamond. So Lockheed, Ben Rich hired Denny Overholser to go ahead and design this. It was called the Hopeless Diamond. From there, they moved on to the intermediate configuration where they added wings and a small cockpit, and then that eventually led on to the Have Blue, which was the predecessor to the F-117. So that's the lineage of how that aircraft came about. Next, please. Now we're going to get into the F-19. This is approximately a 1986 sighting by a Learjet pilot not too far from the remote test site in Nevada. Approximately 10,000 feet, he was flying and just popped out of a series of clouds. And to his lower left-hand position and just ahead of him, he noticed a very unusual aircraft. It was a flattened football diamond-shaped aircraft that had a ventral and dorsal tail fin arrangement. There was control surfaces along the leading and trailing edge of the aircraft. It had a trapezoidal exhaust port. There was an air intake on both sides of the pilot's compartment with a very interesting configuration right here. So it dawned on this Learjet pilot that he could have actually ran into the clouds, and so he called ATC, which was Nellis at the time, and said, Tower, why didn't you advise me of the traffic that's in my vicinity? And the voiceover said, what traffic? We're not painting anything. And this Learjet pilot said, well, the heck there isn't. I'm looking at this flattened football diamond black-shaped aircraft with a tail on top, a tail on the bottom, and a X-15 splitter canopy, and he was so close he could actually see the pilot's helmet. And he said, why didn't you guys tell me of this? And then another voice, a deeper voice, came on the radio and said, pilot of such and such Learjet, you are to land at Nellis Air Force Base, and when you land at Nellis Air Force Base, taxi to the end of the tarmac, and when you taxi to the end of the tarmac, do not depart your aircraft, we will meet you. So the pilot did as told, and for the next 18 hours he was debriefed about an aircraft he never saw. But this was an actual pilot sighting. Next, please. Here you see Mark's original sketch of what this thing actually looked like. Next, please. Now, we don't know about armaments of this aircraft. We don't even know if it carried an armaments, but if it did, it might have had the rotary launch bay similar to the B-1. But we do know it utilized the retractable tail on the bottom here, kind of like the B-17 tail, but with an identical mirror image one on the lower section. So this was the F-19. Next, please. Now here you see how we went from the A12 to the what's termed the Aurora, which is not the actual name of the aircraft. M151 would be a better configuration, or actually the F100 Sentinel. You can see the 75-degree swept wing configuration. Next, please. Now this is an actual U.S. Air Force Air Material Command Wright-Patterson Air Force Base insignia. And if you look here, almost as a tongue-in-cheek joke on the public, they're actually admitting that there's at least 3 classified aircraft out there. And in this insignia, you can see embedded in here, here you see on the external, there's the B-2, and then over here we have the F-117, and then finally we have the Sentinel in this location, and also the 75-degree configuration. So in their own documents, they're almost telling us that these things are real. Next, please. Skunkworks, the evidence stacks up to a near certainty that a revolutionary step has been made in aircraft design. Absolutely, according to Ben Rich. Next, please. Skunkworks migrates north to the desert. Well, of course, the Skunkworks was based out of Burbank, not too far from here, but later on it was moved to Air Force Plant 42 Palmdale. April 9th, 1990, Skunkworks becomes its own separate company. So now you can see how it was moved to Palmdale, which is something that all of us can actually go see now with the large bay doors in this location here. Next, please. Here's a shot of Lockheed Skunkworks. Now, nothing is visible on the outside whatsoever. The best you could see are the large bypass bay doors. Most of the secret aircraft are built on the smaller buildings on the other side of the main hangar. Next. Here is the actual main doors right here, and over here you can see a pickup truck. Just to give you a size of scale, this is massive, just massive facility. Next, please. Now, I got this report from a General Electric engineer who had been retired for 30 years. He told me about one particular instance that he was personally involved in, where in 1989 he was at an underground facility at Air Force Plant 42 Palmdale, and during this particular day they were transporting via an underground tunnel a B-52 with a X-20 dinosaur-like parasitic aircraft on the top surface of the B-52, and they were towing it along this tunnel and going from Air Force Plant 42 directly to Edwards Air Force Base, approximately 30 miles as the crow flies, a direct shot. But what's even more interesting than this is he told me that during this tunnel trip that they were taking, there were 4 other separate shafts connecting the main shaft. 2 of the shafts ran south and 2 of the shafts ran north. One of the shafts that ran north was twice as big as this shaft, and he told me that you could take 2 P-52s and put them side to side, and you'd still have 6 feet on either side of the wingtip. So that's how big this other shaft was. Next, please. Now, these are what's known as the keepers of the secrets. If there's anybody who knows anything about what's actually going on now, or what was actually built years ago, it would be these gentlemen here. These are the CEOs of the Skunkworks. Of course, Kaylee Johnson, Ben Rich, Norm Nelson are no longer with us, but we do have Frank Capuccio who's still with us, and we do have the comments made by Ben Rich and the retired Lockheed Skunkworks engineers who have been, they have been willing to talk about some projects. So these are the people that were the keepers of the secrets during their tenure in office. Next. Saturn LH2 powered U2 replacement. This actually got scrapped, CL400. They were talking about something that could fly up Mach 2.5 at 100,000 feet. Actually got canceled, but was resurrected later on. Next, please. Talking about the D-21 drone, this is similar to what's going on with the M151. So here we can see that years ago, Lockheed already built a design with a parasitic aircraft being launched from the top surface of the aircraft. Absolutely. Next, please. Here you can see the Have Blue configuration that eventually led to the F117, and then this is the Hallandale radar cross-section range that you can fly on and over during the weekend days. Next, please. Ben Rich, who is the CEO for this particular program, Alan Brown was the chief engineer, and Dick Santrell was also involved in some of the other type programs. Next, please. Just kind of a interesting timeline of some of the things that Lockheed has worked on. The XP-80, the F-104, both Ben and Kelly were working on this. Ben Rich was specifically regarded as the expert in the engine nacelle intake for the A12. That was his program that he worked on. And then in 1977, during the Carter administration, just after Kelly Johnson retired, that's when Ben Rich picked up that program. Next, please. Now, this is an interesting report from Gung Ho, February 1988. Retired Lockheed engineer said, let's just put it this way. We have some things flying in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas drool. So that's certainly something that's going on now. Next, please. Lockheed Skunkworks Rye Canyon logo. Again, this is their insignia here. And again, I'll let the audience determine what the insignia stands for. Next, please. The F121 Super Sentinel is used as a joint Lockheed-Northrop unfriendly interceptor with a interesting propulsion system that we'll go on to in the next slide. U.S. Air Force top secret nuclear-powered flying triangle, talking about the TR3B Astra. This is the aircraft that uses the liquid mercury that's pressurized to 250,000 atmospheres and then rotated at 50,000 RPM. The resultant decrease in the localized magnetic field of up to 89%, meaning that the multi-mode impulse rockets that you see here on this drawing only have to propel 11% of the craft. But what's interesting also is 89% of the G-forces are taken away also. So you could make a 40G turn and feel very reduced G-forces. Next. Now, an aircraft that looks like this has been seen all over the world. Now, whether it's the TR3B or it's the LTA craft, we don't know, but absolutely these flying triangles exist. They're man-made. and they've been sighted all over the world. Next, please. Here is the actual report on some of the theoretical physical properties of the magnetic field disruptor, and talking about the torsional magnetic fields form when you take liquid mercury and you pressurize it and rotate it to high RPM. Next, please. Now, the December 29th, 1980 report on the Cash Landrum sighting. Very interesting report. That is a dead solid case, without a doubt. Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and a small boy were traveling down the highway at night, and through a series of tree clearings, they saw this particular craft that looked like an inverted double ice cream cone. It had port windows here that were not actually port windows, but they were round and they were inset into the craft. We don't know what they were. There was a flat section here around the circumference of the craft, and then there was an outlet right here. And as Betty stopped the car and saw this thing hovering over the road, it started bobbling and spewing out sparks and flames, and the resultant technology that was associated with this actually made her car door extremely hot. She was burned physically. She eventually suffered from effects of radiation, but immediately after this thing departed, there were 24 double Chinook helicopters that were following this. So I'm proposing that this was one of our original atomic-powered craft that went astray and it was having a malfunction. So certainly this was an absolutely dead solid case, and we know that because it scorched the pavement asphalt of where this took place, completely turned it black. The Army Corps of Engineers actually came in and repaved that section of the road so anyone could see that there was a big differential in the color of the pavement, and then years later they completely got rid of that road altogether and made a completely different road, so it's no longer there whatsoever. But this was the absolute rock solid case. Next, please. Now, interesting report here. Poor visibility shortens Thunderbird show, talking about the Norton Air Force Base, November 12, 1988, covert dog and pony show exhibit taking place at Norton. Next, please. And inside this big hangar, there were a number of classified aircraft that were put on display to garner support for black programs. Senator Alan Cranston was present, Congressman George E. Brown Jr. was present, and a number of high-level military and Air Force brass. Next, please. And here you can see different shots of what this hangar is. Very, very large hangar. It's still at Norton Air Force Base, which is retired now. Next. Interior shot of the hangar at Norton. You can see just how large this hangar really is. Next, please. And then the final shot here showing the interior. Next, please. Now, what was actually in this exhibit was fascinating, to say the least. One of these aircraft, which was seen by a very high-level aerospace engineer, was approximately 100 feet across. It was completely scorched black in color, used thermal-resistant abrasive tiles taken directly off the space shuttle, approximately 60 feet across here. There were 2 air intakes on both sides of the center line. It was an unmanned aircraft. Control surfaces along the leading and trailing edge, and then a very interesting fuel injector section here on a ridge. Tricycle landing gear that had a stainless steel wire mesh wheel type configuration. Now, what the concept being here is, and this thing was totally unmanned, the turbojets would be used to propel this aircraft at approximately Mach 3. Once that happens, these NACA air intakes would slam shut completely, making it very aerodynamically efficient. And once that happens, they would start introducing a modified liquid methane fuel with a boron-based additive directly into the superheated shock wave of this aircraft. And as soon as that happens, it combusts and compresses between the superheated shock wave and the tapered afterbody of this aircraft, pushing it across the sky at about 12,000 miles an hour. No moving parts whatsoever. There are also 121 launch tubes, each containing a 1/10 megaton warhead that could be launched in 1/10 of a second. 18 of these aircraft were built, so you multiply 121 times 18, that's a tremendous capability. So that was one of the aircraft that was on this display. Next, please. Here you can see the Poplar Mechanics version of it here, and then the external burning in this location. Next, please. Now, when you have a report from Aviation Week Space Technology and then you follow it up with Jane's intelligence briefing from Jane's Defense Weekly, now you've got a real solid case of a real aircraft. And we also have the aerospace report. So 3 independent sources are talking about the same flattened football diamond configuration. So without a doubt, definitely a real aircraft. Next, please. Another aircraft that was on display at this Covert Dog and Pony Show was what we're calling the Superstall. It was a single pilot aircraft that used an off-the-shelf F-16 heads-up display. There was a conventional tail arrangement in this location. It had a very interesting outrigger landing gear configuration with 2 miniature turbofan jet engines that tapered back to modified platypus exhaust ports, and then very interesting Venetian blind Inconel metal thrust vectoring plates that could be angled from 0 to 45 degrees angle of attack, used for taking advantage of the Coanda effect to take off vertically. So that was the Superstall. It also had a 30 millimeter Gatling gun up front. Next, please. And this is the Gatling gun. It's the same one that's used on the A-10 tank buster. Next, please. Just to give you a size of this thing is huge. I mean, we're talking about a very serious capability. Now, due to the fact that it did not have wet wings in this particular aircraft, the range would be very limited. Next, please. Here you can see the good shot of the pilot in the F-16, and then here is where the thrust would be dropped right over the top surface of the wing. So this is the Superstall. Next, please. Now we're talking about the Williams International FJX-2, 78 pounds empty weight. It produces 780 pounds of thrust. I'm proposing that this variant of this engine may have been the propulsion system used on the Superstall. Now, this never made it into the commercial airline industry or anything for private industry either. Next. This was supposed to be used for the next generation advanced general aircraft transportation system for all of us, but again, it never happened, or it hasn't happened yet. Next. Turbofan engine, again, here you see the Williams International. So NASA has already had this in proposal, but we never got the advantage of that new engine that could revolutionize our private aircraft industry. Next, please. Here are some of the aircraft that it was going to propose to propel, but they switched and no longer using this particular engine. Next, please. Now, another craft that was on display, and there were 3 of these separated by a large black curtain, is something called the Fluxliner, also called the ARV. There were 3 of these measuring 2460. The largest one was 130 feet in diameter. They were completely man-made, using off-the-shelf components. Now, if we break this down, you can see the upper crew compartment had a crew of 4. Pilots sat in a ACES II seat ejection seat system that taken directly off the F-4 Phantom. There were 6 CCD cameras and 1 on top for a total of 7. They could all be slewed in conjunction to produce an artificial image on the inside of the pilot's visor, directly like the Apache helicopter. There was a submarine hatch port right in this location. Also a interesting Wimshurst generator flywheel here. There was a 12-foot diameter Tesla coil here, 35-degree swept panels that were made out of a composite. The aerospace engineer who saw these said that these things looked like they had been around for decades. There were grease stains and fingerprints all over them. This thing had been around a long time. There were a number of oxygen tanks down here. There were capacitor plates at the lower section here. Next, please. Here's another sketch here. There was an articulated arm here, and then there was 7 different capacitor plates with the positive plate always at the top. Next, please. Now, the concept being, and this is how, in a nutshell, they work this thing. 2 deep cycle marine batteries were used for initial startup, and that electrical high voltage charge was sent into this 12-foot diameter Tesla coil. And once that happens, there's a magnetic field that forms in the form of a toroid donut on the top of this aircraft. So looking as a top view down, you would see a donut. And the pilot, by way of this rheostat, had the capability of overlaying those field lines onto these capacitor plates, taking advantage of the Biefeld-Brown effect, and that allows them to control pitch, yaw, and roll. So in a nutshell, that's how this thing is actually working. Next, please. Different cutaway section here. Here you can see the cameras that were taken directly off the Vegas casinos. Next. We are flight testing vehicles that defy description. To compare them conceptually to the SR-71 would be like comparing Leonardo da Vinci's parachute design to the space shuttle. Air Force Officer Gung Ho, 1988. Absolutely, without a doubt. Next. We have things that are so far beyond the comprehension of the average aviation authority as to be really alien to our way of thinking. And I interviewed one of the other author of Ben Rich's book called Skunkworks, who was at Tonopah Test Range just prior to the F-117 being declassified, and they were at a cafeteria having lunch, and one of the F-117 pilots came over to him and just plainly said, we have things flying that are beyond belief. That's consistent with what this Air Force colonel is telling us. Next. U.S. Air Force NEPA program, that's the Nuclear Energy for Propulsion of Aircraft. It ran from 1946 to 1951. And in all the aerospace literature, beginning in 1955, going on to 1960, we heard the Air Force talking about atomic-powered aircraft. That was all the rage. It was replaced by ANP, which was the aircraft nuclear propulsion. This was 1951. Convair had the NB-36, the X-6 by Convair, and also the heat transfer reactor experiment, which was the HTRE-3 experiment. Next, please. Here you can see the B-36. It had a nuclear reactor on board, but was never propelled by the nuclear reactor. They just wanted to see if they could actually build something that could fly this thing. Now, there was at least 10,000 pounds of shielding up front to shield the pilot, so you can think about the inefficiencies that this would actually cause for your fuel consumption. Your range would go down dramatically, but if it could actually get it to work, it would have an unlimited range. Next, please. Here is the Convair version of their atomic-powered bomber that could go around the world unrefueled. Next. And then this is another configuration of it, almost similar to the Convair version. Next. Here is the nuclear-powered jet engine. Soviets flew a version of this, but theirs spewed fission material and fallout off the aft end of the engine exhaust, so that's really not a good thing that we'd want to do here. Next, please. Now, this same engineer who I interviewed who talked about the B-52 in the underground tunnel at Air Force Plane 42 also told me that he worked in 1960 on the NEPA program at a secret underground chamber beneath Air Force Plant 42, well actually Air Force Wright-Patterson Air Force Base hangar number 4B in 1960, and it was 40 feet in diameter, had a crew of 1, and I asked him what would be the need for 4 robust landing gear that you can see in this 2D drawing here, and I asked him, was it provisions for extra fuel? And he said nope. And then I asked him, was it provisions for cargo? And he said nope. And then I could sense just from his speaking to me on the phone that he was just about ready to slam down the phone. So I traced back in my mind, what were they actually working on in 1960? They were working on atomic-powered spacecraft. And I said, well, is that the shielding for a nuclear reactor, the lead shielding? And he said, yes. That's the reason why they had such robust landing gear. Next, please. This is an actual program. Now, T. Townsend Brown, in the 1920s and 1930s, talked about electrogravitic propulsion systems, and I think all of us here can relate to T. Townsend Brown. We've all seen this before, but we don't even really think about it. I bet everyone here has heard of the ionic breeze. It moves air without any moving parts. Well, if you do a patent number search and talk about and trace the lineage of where that comes from, it comes from T. Townsend Brown. That's where that comes from. Next, please. And here is his patent, 3,187,206, talking about a charged capacitor that if you take a capacitor and you charge it to very high voltage positive, there's a resultant movement in the direction of the positive charge right here, similar to the leading edge of the B-2. Next. And here you can see that there's no moving parts on here. This is a completely electric propulsion system. His electrokinetic experiment. Next, please. Hunt for Zero Point is Nick Cook's book. Very good book on a number of classified programs, including some German programs that were at the very close of World War II. Next. This is a very interesting, still classified aircraft that crashed on the East German border in 1989 during the first month of the Bush Senior administration. It had a crew of 2 that sat tandem. Now, I definitely think that this was a Lockheed design because if you look at the pattern recognition here, you can see the faceted flat plate technology that's used identical to the F117. It also had 3 of these spheres or balls. There were 2 up front and 1 in the aft section. And when this particular craft crashed in 1989, one of these balls ejected. We'll go on to the next one here. And you can see here there was a hull breach on the aft section here that had an angle of attack of about 15 degrees. One of these balls popped out, and when the recovery team tried to recover one of these spheres, they put it inside a case, and when they closed the door of the case flipped up on its own. So there was something still going on with the propulsion system of these balls, which had the consistency of the exterior of a pineapple, and it had embedded braided gold cord inside. So that was the crash of a Flying Triangle, East Germany, 1989. Next. It was not East German, but it crashed on the East German border. It was one of ours. The G engines are coming. By far the most potent source of energy is gravity. Using it as power to power future aircraft will attain the speed of light. Absolutely what we were talking about, atomic-powered spacecraft. Vintage 1955 to vintage 1960. Next, please. Spaceships that conquer gravity. It talks about here, at least 14 United States universities and other research centers are hard at work cracking the gravity barrier. Convair on the East Coast, Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Company of Baltimore, Maryland, Bell Aircraft Company of Buffalo, New York, and Sperry Gyroscope Company of Great Neck, New York, maintain teams of researchers and engineers prying into nature's most jealously guarded secret, gravity. So again, 1957 report talking about atomic-powered aircraft and harnessing the force of gravity. So it's already a done deal. Next. Popular Science talking about their Aurora-type aircraft. Next, please. Secrets of Area 51, which is the largest dry lake bed in the world. You could land 2 shuttles on either side and still have 5,000 feet in between. Beside this, there's 2 other dry lake beds, 1 half paved and 1 dry lake. Next. Here you can see their sub-type runway here. Next slide, please. Now this is the map on how to get to the covert, not so covert anymore, Northrop Radar Cross-Section Range, which is in Tehachapi, California. Next, please. And here you can see these are not runways, actually. These are radar cross-section ranges. The parabolic dishes are in this location. Next, please. Here is the Air Force Plant 42 and the McDonnell Douglas, which is now the Boeing radar cross-section range. Next. Here you can see their range here. And this is a very interesting wheeled type building that moves on 12 rubber wheels to hide what they're testing here on a pylon. Next slide, please. You can see here the tracks right here going to the pylon section. This is where they put the test articles right on the top surface of the pylon. Next, please. Again, here's another shot here. Now we're going to move on to the Helendale facility. Next slide. This is the Helendale Lockheed facility. Now you can fly over these during the weekend and take your own shots just so that you can make these real to yourself. Next slide, please. Now here is the approximately 170-degree hairpin turn that the lowboy trucks use when they carry in or ship in the test articles. This is a 50-ton concrete door that uses hydraulic jacks to move over, and then different type craft can pop out of there via pylon type configuration. Next, please. Now this is a photograph of a good friend of mine, naval combat veteran Jack Pickett, who was actually the NCO Club newsletter publisher at Mcdill Air Force Base. This is September 1967. Next slide, please. And he was driving down the perimeter road at Mcdill Air Force Base, and his business associate, a man by the name of Harold Baker, was with him on the passenger side. And as they were driving down this perimeter base road, they saw across the chain link fence 4 of the most amazing aircraft that have ever been built. Absolutely. Next slide, please. They measured 20, 40, 70. The largest one was 116 feet in diameter. This was a real U.S. Air Force jet flying wing disc program. The smaller one had an air intake on both sides of the pilot's compartment that tapered back to an extremely high vertical tail that you see here. All had tricycle landing gear. There was the designation experimental written on the port side of the fuselage. Next slide. Here you can see the large one was used as a long-range reconnaissance bomber, had a crew of 5 to 6. There were 2 air intakes on both sides of the pilot's compartment, and then 4 exhaust ports on the lower aft section of the craft. Next slide, please. Here you can see a good cutaway here with the tricycle landing gear. This is the 20 to 40 foot disc and the U.S. Air Force designation on the upper starboard side of the aircraft. Control surfaces along the circumference of the disc. So as Jack saw this craft, he was so astounded by what he saw that he went into the general's office and asked permission to do a story, because these particular aircraft suffered from stability problems, and it was the Air Force decision to scrap all remaining in this family, with the exception of the 4 that were Mcdill Air Force Base at the base scrapyard. Next slide. Here you can see again the large 116-foot craft with the 4 exhaust ports. So Jack Pickett was really interested in taking photographs of these aircraft at the base scrapyard, but there's no photography allowed on the Air Force Base. So the general said, why don't you come follow me? So he took Jack Pickett up inside the general's private armed guard facility library at Mcdill and proceeded to open up a large file drawer and started laying out literally hundreds of officially stamped U.S. Air Force photographs of these aircraft in flight on the tarmac in formation flight with F-84 Thunderjet interceptors. Next slide, please. Here is a shot of the computer-generated forensic composite illustration of what it looked like in flight with the 2 exhaust ports at the rear. Next slide, please. And so Jack Pickett got this story together, 16 officially stamped photographs, and he had an entire story ready to go to the publishers. This is his from-memory sketch of what they look like in flight with the F-84 straight wing and a P-80 Shooting Star. That was also another aircraft that was flying in formation. Next slide. Here is the model that has now gone into production. Happy to say that we now have a model of what this thing actually would look like. Next slide, please. And just before going to press with this story, there was an overflight of a much more advanced VTOL version of this aircraft that took off from Avon Park about 100 miles southeast of Mcdill. And it flew over downtown Miami at treetop level. There was a propulsion system malfunction, and on the next morning newspapers, it was all over the news. Major TV coverage. So Jack picked up the Tampa Tribune paper, brought it into the general's office, and said, "Gentlemen, I think we've got a problem here, because on one side, I'm getting ready to release this story on these U.S. Air Force jet flying wing disc aircraft that you're declassifying, and then on the other side, you're denying the existence of this thing that flew over downtown Miami. What do you guys want to do about this?" Next one, please. Well, the general excused himself, and he contacted Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska, contacted Secretary of the Air Force, contacted the Secretary of Defense, and it came down from the highest echelons of the government to delay publication, and that's where this story died in 1967. But it was a real Air Force program. Next, please. That's fine. And here you can see the air intakes on both sides of the pilot's compartment. Now you can see that the look-down capability on approach to landing would be pretty well cut off, because you've got the whole forward section of it here, and that's one reason why this program was scrapped. Next, please. Section here with the experimental. And then Jack Pickett, who I spoke to many times and met personally, said that the vertical tail on the largest aircraft was higher than the mall parking lot lights that you would see out on the mall parking lot. So you can imagine just how tall this tail was. He also said that when he walked under the large 116-foot craft, and he's over 6 feet tall, he put his hand up and could not touch the lower surface of this disc, so it was very massive. Next, please. Here you can see a shot of what the exhaust ports look like. Now, there were some kind of Venetian blind vectoring vanes embedded inside these exhaust ports. Next, please. And then there would be skin seams here. The Air Force star and bar was on the port side, and then the U.S. Air Force logo was on the starboard side. Next, please. U.S. Air Force 40-foot flying disc. Next slide, please. Now, this is the computer-generated forensic composite illustration of it being towed on the dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base. Next, please. Here is the illustration showing the 40-foot disc and also the 116-foot disc right here with a crew of 5 to 7. Next, please. This is the computer-generated forensic composite illustration showing the declassification ceremony that someday I hope will actually take place. This certainly can be declassified. Next, please. Here you can see the very interesting landing gear. Now, everything that you see here is based off of Jack Pickett's original composite sketches and verbal descriptions. The tricycle main landing gear had 6 for the mains, almost similar to the Boeing 747, but then there were 4 groups of 4 on either side of the nose gear. So a ridiculous amount of nose gear for what you see in this configuration. That may be indicative of a rough field landing type capability. Next, please. Here it is on takeoff roll with an F-84 swept wing configuration. And you can see the experimental here, and then the wheels are just getting retracted up inside the hull of the ship. Next, please. A bottom view here showing the designation of the star and bars, and then also the very interesting landing gear configuration. Next, please. In flight over Edwards Air Force Base, and then you can see here it would definitely be instability because you just have no way of, your roll axis would be slightly unstable. Next. Here it is with the 2 exhaust ports out of the aft end of the craft and then an F-86 Sabre jet in formation. Now, if this case only was hinged on Jack Pickett, we wouldn't have much at all if we only have one person. But if we move on to the next slide here, and we'll see it again flying over Edwards Air Force Base, there's another gentleman who saw this same exact aircraft. Next, please. And this is him right here. This is retired Air Force pilot Warren Bots, who in 1966 was at an Air Force reunion of the Flying Tigers, and they were based across Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, if we go to the next slide, right here to hangar number 4, Bay E. This is 1966. The wives were with them at this meeting, and they went into this particular hangar right here. This is hangar number 4, Bay E, which has 5 bays, A, B, C, D, and E. And as they were walking through a connecting doorway, Warren Bots got to the very end here, which is Bay E, and if we move to the next slide, inside this hangar was the exact same aircraft that Jack Pickett had saw 1 year later. So we have independent secondary confirmation of the same particular aircraft. And that's one way that we can definitely nail this down. So I'm definitely convinced that a number of these deep black programs can definitely be declassified without representing any threat to the national security of the United States. The propulsion systems associated with these programs could definitely benefit our current condition by reducing ozone effects, and it can repair the environment. We can improve the lives of people in the United States and also improve the lives of everyone on the world, and I want to thank you for your attention.